So we're taking a look at a game from PrepTest 80, game number 4. And for good or ill, this is probably a game that disrupted some law school plans. Some people who thought they were going in the fall now realize they have to take the February test. Or some people were just entirely swayed that they shouldn't go to law school at all. I'm not going to lie to you, this is a strange game. This is not a common game, but even though it's a little bit different, it does have antecedents. There have been other games on the test that are similar to this. So we got these three companies, R, S, and T, and they're trading buildings. The buildings come in three classes, 1, 2, and 3. They tell you which company owns which buildings and what class the buildings are. R owns G, Y, and Z, and it's 1, 3, 3. And by the way, on test day, even though they obviously give you this information, write it out. They give you tons of room, write it out somewhere on the page. It's way more meaningful and easier for me to see that R owns G, Y, and Z, and it's 1, 3, 3 if it's written there, rather than the way it's actually written on the page. It's written pretty dense language on the page in terms of you have to reread the entire sentence to get the idea of what it's saying. RealProp owns the Garza Tower Class 1, the Yates House Class 3, the Zimmer House Class 3. Write it out. Easier to process. So they tell us these three companies. They tell us which buildings they own. They tell us which classes. Then they tell us there's a few rules for how you can trade these. You can trade one for one of the same class. So I could trade building L as a Class 2. So I could trade it for M, or I could trade it for O, or I could trade it for K. I can trade a Class 1 for two Class 2s, so I could take G and I could trade it for M and O. Or I could take G and I could trade it for K and M, whatever. And then I can trade Class 2 for two Class 3s, so I could take that L and trade it for Y and Z. I could take that O and trade it for Y and Z. All right, you get the gist. Like I say, even though this game is odd, it is not without its forebears, but the weird thing is you got to go way back in time to find them. And you definitely want to do that. Go back to about PrepTest 10, PrepTest 12, 13, PrepTest 18. I tell you what, down in the comments, I'll make sure I have a list, or in the description of the game, a list of places you can go out and seek out other games like this. Some people call these process games, or trading games, or formation games, or transaction games. They have a lot of different names, but they're relatively rare. They come from the early days of the LSATs back in the early to mid 90s when grunge bands still roamed the earth. And yet, even though these games disappeared around 1995, they started making a comeback again around 2012. If you go back to PrepTest 72, 77, 79, you'll start to see these games have suddenly magically reappeared again. Why did they make a comeback after 20 years away? I have no idea, but you better be prepared. And like I say, I'll make sure I have a list of where you can go and find some other games that use some of these same mechanics, because they are rare, but guess what? You're going to have to be ready for them. Now, that being said, even though the LSAT is more likely than not to throw something weird at you, and I think that there's been a tendency towards that lately, just throwing a unusual kind of type of game at you on the test, a lot of them have the same kind of moving pieces, and I'll try and describe to you why I'm doing something, what I'm doing, why I'm doing it. First thing I noticed on this game was Y and Z. They told us you can trade a Class 2 for two Class 3s, and I noticed that these were the only two Class 3s we have, which means I can't just trade Y for something, because the 3 by itself is not worth something. If I'm going to trade Y and Z, I have to trade them together. What are Y and Z worth? I was like, well, Y and Z are worth a 2. And I decided to make a note to myself, hey, Y and Z together, you're worth a 2. And I thought, as long as I'm doing that, I may as well do it with the other ones as well. What's this 1 worth? This 1 is worth 2 2s. What's this 1 worth? 2 2s. What's this 2 worth? 2 3s. And now down here I said, all right, 2 of these 2s together could be worth a 1, and this other 2 I could trade for 2 3s. At that point I started to realize that the way these buildings lay out, it can only go a few different ways. What I mean by that is obviously you can have a 133, you can have a 1-2, you can have a 2-2-2. But what's that 2-2-2 worth? It's worth a 1-3-3. T and R could directly trade its buildings, and R could end up with a 2-2-2. What is a 1-3-3 worth? Well, I could trade those 3 3s for a 2, and I could end up with R having 1 and 2. Every single one of these companies has the same value in terms of their buildings. The other thing I notice is that, and this is very common on these kind of transaction games, is that there was nothing particularly unique about G, Y, Z, F, and L. And what I mean by that is if you take a look at the rules, you don't have any rules about G. You don't have any rules about K. You don't have any rules about Y or Z or F or L or M or O. You don't have any rules about any of your individual buildings. And that means any individual building of the same class is basically the same building. And what I mean by that is there's no significant difference between K and M. They're just class 2 buildings. Why is there no difference? Because there's no rules to distinguish K from M. They're basically the same pieces, and that becomes important on these type of games. You can go back to PrepTest C, for instance. There's a game, it's about a motor company making cars. A lot of those cars and factories are kind of interchangeable with each other. There's nothing unique. G and F, they're both class 1s, but there's nothing unique about G and F. They're interchangeable. Now, this game also mentions numbers, and this has become more important in the last 5 years of the LSAT or so as well. What do I mean by mention numbers? It gives us possible numerical distribution of how this game can go, by which I already mentioned one company could have a 1-3-3, one could have a 1-2, one could have a 2-2-2. Now, could this go any other way? Yes, it could, because I can look at S here. I can see S could have, or any company for that matter, could have 2 2s and 2 3s. Well, what would the other companies look like if one of the company did have 2 2s and 2 3s? Well, how many 2s are there? There are only 1, 2, 3, 4 2s. How many 3s are there? There are only 2 3s. What do I have left over? I got my 2 1s, and I have 2 other 2s that are left over. And so the other companies would look like 1 2 and 1 2. These are the only 2 ways numerically this game can take place. When games mention numerical limitations, you should pause at the beginning of the game to figure out those numerical limitations. Now, this is not being clever in the moment, and this is not something where I want you to look at this and say, oh my God, I would never have thought to do that on test day. That's great. You don't need to think to do it on test day. You just need to learn how to do it in advance of test day, and then when you get to test day, you do it automatically. There are a lot of games out there that deal with the different ways you can distribute things numerically, and I'll mention some of those down in the description as well, so you can seek them out, so you can practice them. You can figure out how the numbers shift around. But it's a skill that you are going to need to learn because it's becoming more and more prevalent on the LSAT. Now, there's very little else we can do on this game. If we take a look at the questions here, we've only got 5 questions, but like I say, we don't know how many trades are taking place. And this is very common in these process games, transaction games, where you have no idea how many transactions are going to take place. Or if it's a game dealing with people getting promoted over a certain number of years, you won't know if they're getting promoted over 1 year or 2 year or 10 years. How many transactions are taking place in this game? It could be 1 transaction, 2 transactions, 10 transactions. You have no idea. The timeline is indeterminate, and this is very, very common in these types of games. Since you don't know how many transactions are taking place, or even if any transactions are taking place, then you don't know, there's no deductions you can make at the beginning of this game. Other than this, figuring out the numerical distributions, that's useful, that's always helpful. But other than that, don't worry too much about this game. Jump right into the questions. So that's what we're going to do. Is hopefully you have your test in front of you. If you are reviewing this, I'm going to go through these one by one. Obviously, I can't show you the test because that would be copyright violation, but we can still work through these questions together. So 19 just says, what could be the buildings owned by the 3 companies after only 1 trade is made? And this is a could be question. It's not giving us any new information other than that 1 trade has been made, which means this is the kind of question where you might genuinely have to test the answer choices. That's what we're going to do. So we go on A, we just see if A could be true. A says that company R owns F and G. Well, F is a class 1 building, G is a class 1 building. Can one company own 2 class 1 buildings? And take a look at our numerical distributions. You can own a class 1 building and a class 2 building. You can own a class 1 building and 2 class 3 buildings, but you can't own 2 class 1 buildings. It's not possible to trade for that. And A is gone. You don't even need to check what companies S and T own. If it's eliminated on the basis of R, it's already eliminated. We go into B. In B, company R owns G, K, and O. Well, can you own G, K, and O? G is a class 1, K is a class 2, O is a class 2, 1, 2, 2. And again, don't worry about the buildings, worry about the numbers. Can one company own a 1, 2, 2? Well, you can have a 2, 2, 2, and you can own a 1, 2, but is there anything here where you can own a 1, a 2, and another 2? No, it's gone. On to C. Here we've got company R, it owns G and L. Well, G is a 1, L is a 2. Can you own a 1 and a 2? Yes, in either one of our numerical possibilities, you can own a 1 and a 2. That's absolutely possible. We take a look at S. It has F, Y, and Z. Can you have F, Y, and Z? Well, that's a 1 and a 3 and a 3. Can you have a 1, 3, 3? You can absolutely have a 1, 3, 3. And then we take a look at the last one here. Trustcorp owns K, M, and O. Could Trustcorp own K, and M, O? Since it already does, then it definitely can own K, M, and O. And you're done. Once you find the right answer, stop. If it's C, it's C. Just ask what could be true. C could work. There's always those students out there who insist, well, I'm going to test D and E anyway. That is a waste of time. You will not get through the section if you insist upon testing every answer choice. D and E, you're done. Move on to the next question. So question 20 says, which following cannot be true no matter how many trades are made? All right, so we take a look. So A says the buildings owned by RealProp are F and G. Can company R own both F and G? Well, F and G are both 1s. Can a company own 2 1s? No, it can't. Well, this is a can't be true question, and guess what? The answer is A. Sometimes the test makers take mercy on your wretched soul, and A is the correct answer. I know people freak out when A is the correct answer and go, oh my God, A can't be the correct answer. I still need to check B and C and D and E. No, sometimes A is the correct answer. Like 20% of the time, A is the correct answer. Do not look a gift horse in the mouth. If A is correct, take that gift, move on to the next question. So 21 is our first if questions. If questions normally indicate making a new sketch. Questions that begin with the word which, you can normally solve with your deductions or your rules or old sketches. But questions that start with the word if probably necessitate making some sort of new sketch on the page. Don't try to solve it in your head. There's always those people. We all know those absolute freaks of nature who can solve everything in their head, and we wish we could be like them and we wish we could emulate them. But the fact of the matter is, most of us don't have brains like this. And the fact of the matter is, you could get logic games as your 5th section on the test. The test starts at 8:30 in the morning. The 5th section is going to start about 12:30 in the afternoon. You're exhausted. Write everything down. So we're going to write everything down here. R, S, and T. And here we've got RealProp. It owns only Class 2 buildings. So the only thing RealProp owns is Class 2 buildings. Well, if it only owns Class 2 buildings, then it definitely owns a 222. Because that's the only combination that's only Class 2 buildings. But do we know if S owns a 1-2, or does S own a 1-3-3, or does T own a 1-2, or does T own a 1-3-3? And the fact is, we don't know. We have no idea which way that goes. If we don't know, again, don't do it in your head. Just do both. Do one possibility where S owns the 1-2, one possibility where company T owns the 1-2, and the other possibility have S do the 1-3-3, and this one have T do the 1-3-3. Now we're looking for something that must be true, so it must be the same in both possibilities we have sketched out here. So we take a look at A. Trustcorp owns a Class 1 building. Yeah, no matter whether Trustcorp goes 1-3-3 or 1-2, Trustcorp owns a Class 1 building. Answer has to be A. Again, sometimes you get lucky. It's the test makers being nice to you. They know this game is rough, so they're serving up the answer right away. They're not always going to be so nice, though. So, question 22 is another if. We make another sketch. And here it's saying Trustcorp owns no Class 2 buildings. And we're looking for a must be true. Well, if T owns no Class 2 buildings, take a look. The only way that can go is if Trustcorp has a 133. That's the only version of the numbers here where there's not a 2 in there. 1, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 3, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2. This is a 133. So we've got to go in there, and we know that Trustcorp absolutely owns the 133. Now, how do the rest of the numbers play out? You don't really know, because who's getting the 1, 2 and who's getting the 2, 2, 2? You don't know, so you do both. Just get it down on paper. It takes literally 1 second to write it out. Instead of trying to solve it in your head, write everything down. Don't solve in your head. If you've ever gone to the grocery store and you said to yourself, there's only like 2 things I need. I need toothpaste and toilet paper. And you're like, I don't need to write that down. Believe me, you're going to remember, that you didn't actually buy toilet paper. Probably the next time you're using the bathroom, you'll go, oh my God, I never bought toilet paper. I should have written it down. Yes, always write it down. We forget things almost instantly. Write it down. So we're looking for a must be true. Let's take a look at A. RealCorp owns a Class 1 building. Maybe it could own a Class 1 building, but does it have to? Must that be true? No, because RealCorp could have a 222. So we take a look at B. Southco owns only Class 2 buildings. Maybe, but not necessarily, because S could have a 1-2. Southcorp has made at least one trade with Trustcorp. Now, we have no idea who Southcorp has traded with, because S might have a 1-2, which means it didn't need to trade for that 2 with Trustcorp, even though Trustcorp's end started with 3 2s. Maybe Southcorp, since it began with a 1-2, maybe just didn't trade with anybody. All right. So we go on to D. Trustcorp owns the Garza Tower. Well, Trustcorp definitely owns a Class 1 building, but is it Garza or is it the Flores building? Because that's also a Class 1. You have no idea what that Class 1 is, because all of these buildings are interchangeable. They never cared about the buildings. They only cared about the numbers. And like I say, take a look down below the game. I promise you there will be a list of other places you can find games dealing with numbers, okay? And 23. Oh, well, just again, because we already eliminated A, B, C, and D. I'm getting ahead of myself. If we've eliminated the first 4 on question 22, the answer has to be E, but take a look at it. Trustcorp owns Zimmerhouse. Trustcorp owns both 3s. Y and Z are 2 3s. Yes, absolutely. Has to be E. By the way, on test day, I do think it's a totally baller move. If you've eliminated A, B, C, and D, just choose E. Because if it's not the first 4, it has to be the last one. You can do that on any section. You can do that on logical reasoning. You can do that on reading comprehension. If it's not the first 4, then it's E. 20% of the time, the answer is E. I think that is definitely a baller move if you can be that confident. That's what solves this test, confidence. All right. Finally, which one of the following cannot be true, can never be true, no matter how many trades are made? That's question 23. Well, let's take a look. And this is another which question, so we don't need to make a new sketch necessarily. So A, the buildings owned by RealProp are Lynch, Meyer, and Ortiz. Lynch is a 2. Meyer and Ortiz are both 2s. Can someone own a 2-2-2? Yeah, you can own a 2-2-2. A could be true. We're looking for a cannot be true. So we go on to B. The buildings owned by Southco are Garza and Meyer. Garza is a 1, Meyer's a 2. Can you own a 1-2? Yeah, in both of our numerical possibilities here, you can own a 1-2. So it's not B. We go on to C. The buildings owned by Southco are K, M, and O. K, M, and O are all 2s. Can someone own 3 2s? Absolutely, someone can own 3 2s. All right, on we go. D, the buildings owned by Trustcorp are Flores and Yates. Flores is a 1, Yates is a 3. Can someone just own a 1 and a 3? No. You can own a 1 and a 2, and you can own a 1 and 2 threes, but you can't just own a 1 and a 3. And the answer to 23 has to be D. If you don't do these numbers up front, this game is going to be a very tedious, very lengthy game. With the numbers, however, you can turn this game into something less than 10 minutes. It's probably going to be more than 8 minutes, but somewhere between 9 and 10 minutes, that's what you want to shoot for. You definitely want to practice these. You want to practice these process games, transaction games. You want to practice games that deal with numerical distributions. Both of those things are very likely to be on the next LSAT. They keep coming up and up and up and up, and I'll make sure there's a list somewhere. You can go and seek these games out and practice them and master these skills. If you have any questions on this, leave it in the comments or drop me an email. My email's on there on the website, and I hope that helps. All right, have a good one.